Welcome from the Office for Education Policy. I'm Denise Arola, Associate Director, and today our topic is value-added growth, what teachers need to know. Value-added growth scores have gotten a lot of press since LEARNS was enacted due to the use of value-added growth in the teacher merit pay and in student placement. However, value-added growth scores have been calculated in Arkansas since 2015, and they've been used in various ways to understand the impact of schools on student learning. Today's video is focused on the following things that you see on the screen, and it's part of a series that we're developing, so if you have more questions that you want answered, we will let you know how to contact us so we can address them in our future videos for the Teacher Growth Series. If you're a principal or other administrator and you want to know more about this for your role, we will also address leaders separately, and it's always important to understand the difference between what a teacher needs to know and what a leader needs to know. So we hope this gives you some insight into how to support your teachers as well if you're watching this. At the most basic level, we use achievement as a point-in-time measure of where students are relative to either a set of standards, such as is the case with Atlas, or an established criteria like Pathway to College Readiness, which is the case with ACT Aspire, or relative to how other students do, such as a national percentile ranking, or you might think about NAEP as a comparison to other students in other states. So you can look at progress and achievement in a number of ways. You can look at changes in students' scale score over time if you have a vertical scale, or changes in their performance level over time. But most progress measures compare progress to the three things that we mentioned above. Arkansas's value-added growth scores are derived to tell us more about how students grow in achievement from one point in time to another point in time, and the expectation for growth in Arkansas's model is personalized, as we will talk about more in the few slides to come. One big difference starting in 2024 is that we have a new test of our grade level standards, the standards that students are expected to know and be able to demonstrate, and the standards for which you are responsible for as a teacher at your particular grade level, subject, or course. In this new aligned system, you will have access to more specific information to be able to impact progress in students' achievement as well as their value-added growth score. All of this tunes into the Atlas performance levels, so there's going to be a meaning to their growth and their progress that we really couldn't ascribe before under the ACT Aspire. First, let's talk a little about why value-added growth is so important. From a policy perspective, people are always wanting to be able to make appropriate comparisons among schools or programs or people or environments. And education is no different, but education's complex. And we have an educational system where teachers and schools don't always have control over some of the factors that we know impact student achievement scores. Things like the prior learning a student comes to your classroom with. So you may have no control over whether a student is above or below grade level, but you still have to help that student make progress and grow in their achievement during the year. You may have students who come from economic disadvantage, or you may have a lot of students who come at various levels of English language proficiency. You need a model for the things that aren't under your control that measures change in student achievement sensitive enough to pick up where you've helped a student grow, even if it doesn't show up as a change in their performance level or their achievement level. Our model does that. Our model in Arkansas controls for things that teachers and schools can't control for, and that's super important when we're using it in a variety of different ways. I'd like to introduce to you Ashley Daniel, formerly with Rogers School District and now with the Office for Education Policy. Ashley, she works in the classroom or has worked with classroom teachers a lot with the growth scores. So I'm going to have her talk to you because she is very close to the classroom in her work. Ashley, can you describe for us your work related to helping teachers understand growth and maybe give us some examples from your time in Rogers where using the growth scores has really made an impact on your teachers?
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise. So in Rogers, I struggled for many years. I worked with Rogers Schools for almost 20 years, and it was very difficult for us to find a good measure that really helped us capture student progress over time. The question always was, did we afford a student the opportunity to have a full year's growth? So we over the years have tried numerous different measures, classroom assessments, as many of you have probably experienced, just trying to find the best tool. When Arkansas started incorporating, I believe it was maybe 2018 or 19, this value-added growth model, I finally was able to have a piece of data that truly captured that and quantified that information, and we were able to have such rich conversations with classroom teachers and administrators about student progress and about those individual impacts on learning, and even aggregating them back into groups and seeing how groups are performing if they were targeting some interventions. So it was just a great, valuable piece of information. There's a quote here from me that I say in every training as I was out either working with classroom teachers or administrators, as I'm talking about the Arkansas Value Added Growth Model, and I hate to read a slide to you, but I'm going to go with it. It is nearly impossible in academic world for us to find an academic outcome measure that does not correlate with student demographics. That prior student achievement is impacted and correlated with poverty and race. The value-added growth model we're currently using in Arkansas and are going to continue to use in Arkansas provides that equal opportunity for all students to demonstrate progress. From our students who are an outlier on the lower end of the spectrum, maybe a special education student that's performing so low and it's very difficult to really capture progress over time, you will see as you dig into those individual kids and that growth that this is truly an equal opportunity to demonstrate progress. And at that upper end, it's always those extreme ends, those high AP gifted performing students that it's very difficult to demonstrate progress with. But this tool, because they are compared to themselves, is the best tool to do that.
So there are some particulars about the model that make it useful and important for you. So you can imagine that every student has their own history, representing their prior learning experiences and their demonstration of that learning. We've represented that here in the slide with the different dots from grade 3 to grade 8. As a teacher, you don't control any of what went on prior to grade 8, unless you've been looping with your kids or changing grade levels. And because you don't control that, we need a model that controls for you. As a teacher, Arkansas's model creates a prediction about your students' expected achievement based on how they performed in the past. And as a teacher, that's important because it cuts out the influence that you deal with every day when students are at different achievement levels. And it says, I'm only going to focus on an expectation for this particular student based on where they've been. And that helps it to be more fair and equal opportunity, as Ashley said. I love that. Not only does it personalize the expectation, but our model allows for all students to have their own starting points to be different and also their rate of growth to be different. And this isn't always understood. Value-added models are done a lot of different ways and states use them differently in different ways. But in Arkansas, we don't force an average starting place for your student, and we don't force an average rate of growth. We allow their starting point and their slope or rate of growth to vary as it actually does in reality. And that's super important because it treats every student's history as a unique history.
So with these individual student progress VAM scores, as we call them, and sometimes they're called VAG scores, these value-added growth scores, we rescale them in Arkansas to it's about is it -1 to +1, Denise, I believe, they typically fall, majority of them are going to fall in that range.
They're on a standard scale because we're running their histories on a standard scale so that we can work across the transition of the assessments.
Okay.
Where 0 is the center.
Yeah, so a student at 0 is falling right on their line of expectation. So a 0 means they're growing as expected based on how they've performed in the past. Below a 0, they're falling below expectation, and above a 0 is they're outgrowing their prior history. So just to give us some numbers to kind of wrap our mind around here, we've got some example scores, and we want to just zero in on this case that this is an individual student calculation. So here we have identified 2 students who had a 2021 scale score of 423. So they perform very, very similarly, but you can see their scaled score did not change. So in scaled score land, what does that tell us about them? They may have changed proficiency levels depending on the grade level or the test. So we are not certain at this point what this is really telling us, but when you add that piece of information, that value added growth calculation, we are told a whole lot of historical information about these kids. This is now telling us for one of these students that flat progress of 423 to 423 was actually a significant decline and below their expectation of their trajectory of history, looking at a 4-year backward lens for this child. So the other child, this was actually a positive, falling above their line of trajectory.
Ashley pointed out how important the prior history of the student is and how it really controls that expectation. How other students are achieving also matters for setting reasonable and fair growth expectations. So this is something I think that confuses people a lot. If you take a look at, these are the distributions of the current scaled scores for Atlas for this year, for 2024. And you can look at grades. On the left is mathematics, and you can see that the distributions, these box plots, look like they're in relatively the same position all the way through grade 7 and then grade 8, which is coincidentally in red. The distribution drops a little bit. When our model is running, it's looking at your students' prior score history, but it's also looking at how did all the kids do, and it adjusts the expectation a little bit based on how in general kids are doing at the grade level. So the good news is, 8th grade math scores this year were slightly lower, the distribution was slightly lower than in prior years. But because our model is sensitive to how a particular grade is doing overall, it's going to adjust the predicted score for each student accordingly. So that means that in the prior scenario that Ashley was talking about, it could be that getting the same score the next year is actually demonstrating growth because it's a different set of standards. And in fact, if kids, because that 8th grade is a little bit lower, it will take that into consideration. And it won't necessarily adjust you way down, but it might keep you at a level that is appropriate for growth. This is where we get the nuance that's so important for progress. So kids at the bottom may be progressing their rate of growth. Maybe we're not forcing them to be average, but they may grow more scale score points than students at the top, and it sets that realistic expectation for students. And that's where a lot of the fairness comes in as well. You might be wondering, this year, how did we do growth? Because we have a different test. And we have end of course exams. And this is something we'll probably talk more about in future modules, but just again, how other students are achieving matters for setting reasonable and fair growth expectations. On the left, you can see science, and then on the right, you see the end of course exams. So you have biology, that's a little bit lower, then you have algebra is a little bit lower, biology is a little bit higher, and geometry is much lower compared to, say, 8th grade, or and even biology is just a little bit lower. So what we do here is the expectation for students, because we have students who are taking algebra in grade 7, grade 8, all the way through grade 12. Their expectation is based on how the students taking algebra in their grade are doing. So we take their score history and we go back and we standardize it based on that same group of kids over time. which is how we end up with a fair and reliable estimate of where we expect them to be in algebra this year, or geometry this year, or biology this year, and also how we end up with a growth score that tells us about their progress. So the EOCs will have a growth score if at least one prior year score in achievement is available. And what we do is we standardize those prior scores, and we standardize the current scores, and we calculate the growth. Our model is very strong or robust for changes in assessments. It's basically how it was designed and why it works so well over the years, to provide us with this different measure of how our students are doing that captures efforts that aren't always captured on the achievement scale.
And I just want to add here, Denise, I'm a statistician, and you've explained this process to me numerous times, and it still is very, very complicated. And so if that seems like too much and it's too complicated, you don't really need to understand the details. When you get down to that student level and you're looking at those scaled scores and that performance and that progress over time, side by side, multi-year at the individual student level, it's going to make sense when you see their final value-added growth score at that student level. So as long as it makes sense, the people that have that skill set and that statistical background to be able to calibrate all of these scales so that we can transition smoothly from assessment to assessment. We're so thankful for that skill set and that we're able to do that and continue using such a rich piece of data with this value-added growth scale. So just trust that they have put this data through every process possible to make sure it is giving you meaningful information.
Yes. Thank you, Ashley. That's an excellent point. You know, these growth models are complex, and because they're complex and because not a single person can think of everything, before the scores can be released, they have to go through review with a technical advisory committee for accountability and assessment that is made up of experts in this field who have experience with this type of statistical model. And they're the ones who take a look at this and basically give their blessing for, did we do everything that was needed to make sure you're getting a meaningful score? And that is the case. So hopefully soon you'll be able to see them.
So we are going to continue in this series. There will be multiple videos about this topic, so this is just your intro. So there's more to come. If you have questions on what we've covered, you can just drop us a message on Facebook Messenger. It'll come direct to your research team here at OEP. So just stay in communication with us. Let us know how we can support you.
Yeah, and add anything. If we didn't cover something and you want to make sure it's in a future video, please let us know. We are planning to show you, we're going to have a video on the LEA Insight system, which is where these student level and teacher level and school level data are housed. And fingers crossed, since we went through a roster verification system last year, and teachers are linked based on their certification of the students in their classes, we're hoping this year, one of the delays for the release is we're trying to make sure that teachers can access this directly. Right now, your administrators can go in and they can look at your prior year growth scores. So if you're wanting that information, ask your principal for it. And if your principal isn't sure where to get it, tell them to put that in the common questions, and we'll get to that. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk again soon in our next video.